Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 148. As always, my name is Dr. David C. Noe, here in the Vomitorium South, with my good friend and fabulous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great. As I was telling you on our way down the stairs here, that I got my grades in for the semester.
All right.
I have about maybe 2 days before the summer semester kicks in.
Excellent.
But I'm really enjoying these 2 days.
You're going to milk these 2 days
Yes.
for all they're worth.
I am, right.
You're going to squeeze in a barbecue, a picnic, a softball game.
I think I'm just going to probably...
Trip to the pool.
You might find me just kind of collapsing fetal on my front lawn. But at least it's sunny out.
There you go.
Yeah,
We've got some great weather. We skipped right past the month whose weather we won't mention.
Oh, yes, exactly right.
March.
You just did it.
Well,
yeah.
That's litotes for you.
How are you feeling over there?
Praeteritio.
Yeah.
I'm doing pretty well. Got a little bit of the blues, despite the great weather. I can't really explain it, but that's the nature of the blues.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can cheer you up with a little story from my past.
Yeah.
You know me. You've known me for many years now.
Many years.
You know, when I get sometimes get reflective about my life, and I don't know where I'm going, but
okay.
I sure know where I've been.
Okay,
right.
I can see where this is going.
So I was thinking about back in my high school days,
Yeah.
and science class. And
Were you hanging on the promises of this in the songs of yesterday?
yeah, I was.
Okay.
It was exactly at this time where I was doing this.
All right.
And my science teacher, he would have we do these crazy combustible experiments,
Right.
and but he kept all the kind of the dangerous stuff in his locker.
Okay.
And I was part of this.
Oh no.
This group where we would sneak in. We found the key to this locker, and we go and we kind of mess with this stuff.
Right.
I don't recommend this at all.
Is this a setup?
So, anyways, but the problem with this group is that we would often do it at the last minute. All my friends would chicken out. I ended up going by myself. And so we heard a rumor that our science teacher actually got his hands on some like radioactive material.
Oh no.
So I said, tonight we got to do this. We got to check this out there. So I went in, I broke in, opened the locker. I'm waiting for my friends. And of course, they never show up. And
Right.
I think to myself, here I glow again on my own.
Glow. I have to admit, Jeff, as I was listening,
Yes.
I was thinking, this is too obvious. This is too easy. He's putting a lot of work into this. Where's the funny? But then when you said glow,
Yeah.
I was just explosively funny.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm just trying to keep up with you,
You put that whole thing together.
I did on the drive over.
Wow, that's really nice. When you asked me how, this is not a story topper, but when you asked me how I was feeling, I was thinking, some people's favorite fruit is a watermelon. Mm-hmm. For others, it's like a honeydew melon.
Yes.
Mine is probably the melancholic.
That's your favorite melon?
Yeah.
Nice.
So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about I, Socrates, not Socrates, I, Socrates.
Okay.
Right? And we're continuing on our look through Marrou's book on ancient education. And so,
A History of Education in Antiquity?
yes. Yep.
So this is not a riff on that famous sci-fi book with the movie featuring Will Smith?
Oh, the I, Robot.
No.
Right.
This is I, Socrates.
There's no comma. in
Okay.
there. Right.
Got
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
Got it. And I think that we have some preliminary items, not shout-outs, but
Yeah.
some things we want to kick around the field a little bit.
Right. I thought this was really interesting. You sent me this link a few days ago, and this is one of these topics that I'm fascinated with these current discovery. Well,
Yes.
using modern technology to read some of these carbonized scrolls that were found at Herculaneum.
Yeah, almost 200 years later, or maybe more than 200 years.
Right.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time, right? And I think that there was a lot of foresight in the original excavators to hang on to these things and not just
Right.
pitch them out as charcoal.
Right.
And so, I think as I said to you in an email or something, that I would love to do an episode on this, but a little tease maybe is that
Well, and the science is deep.
yes, the science is deep.
So it's going to be quite a bit of prep so that we don't, as normal, say stupid things.
Exactly. The science is deep. The tech is very techy.
Yes.
But using kind of spectrographic analysis and AI, they've been able to read these carbonized scrolls without having to actually unroll them.
Right. Because as soon as you begin to unroll them,
They crumble.
right, like a pastry horn, right?
Exactly.
Just falls into bits.
That's right. So, but without all that flaky goodness.
That's right.
And so the link that you sent me is that on one of these scrolls, they have there's some text that pinpointing isn't the right word,
No.
but it has specific information about where exactly Plato was buried.
Purports to be kind of a description of his last days too.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So kind of like Margot Fox, one of our fabulous guests, the riddle of the labyrinth about the decipherment of linear B. Remember, she used to write obituaries for the New York Times.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is an amazing job, frankly.
No doubt.
So this is kind of in step with that sort of thing.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
And I think you have a quote for us.
Yeah, this is from the article from the link. Maybe we can put this in the description for this episode. It reads, historical accounts vary about how the Greek philosopher Plato died. In bed while listening to a young woman playing the flute, at a wedding feast, or peacefully in his sleep. But the few surviving texts from that period indicate that the philosopher was buried somewhere in the garden of the Academy he founded in Athens. The garden was quite large, but archaeologists have now deciphered a charred ancient papyrus scroll recovered from the ruins of Herculaneum, indicating a more precise burial location in a private area near a sacred shrine to the Muses, according to Costanza Milani, director of the Institute of Heritage Science at Italy's National Research Council. So this is really this is very interesting.
Fascinating.
Right? Now, to kind of let some air out of the balloon.
Okay.
I did some kind of poking around.
Okay.
So I mean, the Academy
in Plato's grave.
Well, I wish. But the location of the Academy has been found. It's an archaeological park. And I was looking at some of the archaeological studies, and as far as I could tell, nobody's been able to identify, like, within those remains, oh, this is the Garden of the Muses.
I see.
So as far as like locating Plato's grave itself, it would still be a lot of guesswork.
Now, are you the kind of individual who would make a pilgrimage to Plato's grave?
Without a doubt.
You've been to Memphis, right? And Graceland and seen that sort of thing?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, a couple of days ago, I went down to Battle Creek, where there is an old cemetery that I've been meaning to get to for many years, and checked it out and visited some of these famous graves.
Right.
There. Yeah.
Did you see the Post and Kellogg brothers?
I saw the Post and Kellogg brothers. I saw Sojourner Truth is buried there.
Right.
There's a
Harriet Tubman also?
She is not buried there. No. Junior Walker, who he's the guy who played the sax solo on Foreigner's Urgent, is buried there. And it was
now your life has meaning.
It does. It was fantastic.
I'm sure it was great.
Yes.
Why didn't you take me along?
I don't think that many other people are interested in that kind of thing.
You're right. and 1 hour, 1.5 hours per week is about our limit, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating about Plato.
Yeah.
And it's kind of got to be difficult for Isocrates that in an episode pretty much dedicated to Isocrates, he is once again upstaged by Plato.
Yeah, I was thinking of like a corollary for him. In reading Marrou's article, he talks about how he ran a rival school to Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum.
Right.
And so I kind of thought he's in as far as like he's remembered, like if he was one of the Three Stooges, he's Shemp.
Yeah.
Right.
I was thinking in sports terms.
Yeah. What do you think?
On the totally mistaken assumption that our audience is deeply into sports.
Yeah.
He's like the Scottie Pippen to Michael Jordan.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you followed any of that controversy regarding the the Last Dance documentary that came out.
I watched it
3-4 years ago.
Yes.
And Jordan bent over backwards to say Pippen is the greatest teammate there's ever been.
Yeah.
And Mr. Pippen didn't like that.
No, he didn't.
He's quite upset.
Right.
So I mean, obviously, an extremely talented individual in his own right.
Right.
But always living in Plato's shadow.
Right, exactly. Right. So he plays this kind of thankless role in history.
Right.
But Marrou makes the argument that in terms of like the survival of process of ideals and of education, you might say that he won.
It's Isocrates all the way.
All the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I believe you have an opening quote. You're doing all the quotes today.
I do. Yeah, sure. This one is from...
So you're going to read this one too, I guess.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. We got some more quotes and you can have your fair share. So this comes from, this is an old school. We're talking 1881. G. Grote.
George Grote.
Who wrote this text, Plato and the Other Companions of Socrates. And he writes here, during the last half of Plato's life, his school and that of Isocrates were the most celebrated among all that existed at Athens. There was competition between them, gradually kindling into rivalry. Such rivalry became vehement during the last 10 years of Plato's life, when his scholar, Aristotle, then an aspiring young man of 25, proclaimed a very contemptuous opinion of Isocrates and commenced a new school of rhetoric in opposition to him. Cephisidorius, a pupil of Isocrates, retaliated, publishing against Aristotle as well as against Plato, an acrimonious work which was still read some centuries afterwards. Theopompus, another eminent pupil of Isocrates, commented unfavorably upon Plato in his writing. So it's
getting nasty.
It's like East Coast, West Coast rap battles.
I guess.
Right. They're throwing shade at each other. All right.
Yeah, Cephisidorius, that's really interesting. An acrimonious work which was still read some centuries afterwards.
So I'm guessing by the tone of that is that this does not survive.
No.
All right, Dave, before we get into Marrou's chapter here, I believe you have a limerick to share.
Yes, I do. So I want to see if the audience can figure out who wrote this one. Isocrates' speeches so grand, his words swayed the whole Grecian land. With rhythms so fine, his message did shine. A true master, his rhetoric planned. So what do you think? Did I write this or did someone else write this? What does the audience think about that?
Sure. Are you going to take a poll? Or
I don't know. They've suffered. I'm just giving them a moment to think about it.
Gotcha.
They've suffered through many of my limericks.
That is true.
Yeah. Why are you laughing?
Well,
And no, this one was written by Google's Gemini AI.
oh, I'm so glad you did not write this.
The prompt was, write a limerick about the ancient orator Isocrates. And this is the best it could do.
Wow. Okay.
So I think we're safe for a while.
Right.
I think we're safe for a while.
The robots aren't going to take over quite yet.
No, and you have a little bit of an anecdote I heard recently about your foray into the AI world.
Should I share that?
Yeah, I think you should.
All right. So, actually, I'm gonna
save it?
I'm gonna save it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I thought that it would be in line with the work of one of my favorite critics, Mr. Milliating.
Milliating?
Do you know Mr. Milliating?
Oh, Hugh. Right. Yes. Yes, I did experience a bit of AI humiliation.
Okay, tell us more.
Well, I'm actually going to save this story because
right.
it was very recent, and I don't think that all the threads have been tied up yet.
Okay.
And so I'm gonna
let them dangle a little longer.
Once it's definitive, I will share this story.
Okay.
Yes.
So who was Isocrates, Jeff?
He was Mr. Rhetoric.
Okay.
Right. And so he's not remembered as an original thinker, right? And so he's always, as we said, he's always in Plato's shadow, and he does not survive as someone who kind of changed the face of philosophy. And Marrou he wrestles with, can we even call him a philosopher?
Right.
But he is perhaps better remembered as someone who really shaped education and opening it up to I think a lot more people than perhaps Plato's academy had intended.
I see.
Yeah.
So he was born in 436. And can you set the stage historically a little bit? What's happening in 436 Athens?
Well, we're on the doorstep of the Peloponnesian War,
right?
And in some ways on the doorstep of the kind of the decline of Athens, classical Athens as we know it. He's a almost exact contemporary of Plato. I think Plato born in 428, Isocrates born in 436.
428, 427.
Yeah.
So he was born right before the plague.
Yes.
Isocrates, and Plato was born right after.
Right after, exactly. Yeah. And then he outlives Plato. He dies in 338, so he lives to be 98-ish years old, which is extraordinary.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's our oratory guy.
Right.
The art of oratory is the chief focus of his educational project.
So this is chapter 7 of Marrou, the first part. The Masters of the Classical Tradition, Part 2. Part 2, Isocrates. Part 1 was Plato.
Right.
So this is how he begins. Thus, in his pursuit of inner perfection, the philosopher retreated into a heroic solitude. But what, in the meantime, was to become of the actual city? Must it be left to the bad shepherds? Platonism, aiming too high, had left this problem unsolved. Such, at least, was Isocrates' opinion. Isocrates' own teaching had an immediate and, in a sense, a quite prosaic objective: the formation of the intellectual elite, which Greece needed hic et nunc, here and now.
Right, right.
So that's our setup then for the chapter.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, as we were talking about in our last episode from Marrou, is that Plato saw the academy, the final stages of the academy for the training of these philosopher kings. That would run the republic, but we wrestled with this question of how literally are we supposed to take these things?
Right.
And there's a lot of questions of what exactly Plato intended as far as his programming. But Marrou suggested that Isocrates saw that it was very diffuse.
Right.
And it needed much more kind of practical and immediate application. And so he's still interested in educating the elite, but in perhaps a much more direct. I think later in the chapter he suggested a much more broad fashion than perhaps Plato envisioned.
So as you also noted from page 79, Isocrates necessarily gets left in the shade.
Yeah.
And is more or less sacrificed to his brilliant rival in every possible respect: power of attraction, radiance of personality, variety of temperament, depth of thought, or in art itself. Isocrates is not in the same street as Plato.
Yeah.
His work seems flat and monotonous, his influence superficial and even pernicious. But
it was his program that
Correct.
carried the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. He proved to be more successful long term. That from the time of Cicero to our own day, says Marrou, Isocrates has not lacked supporters, some of whom have even gone so far as to bestow upon him the title
The father of humanism.
the father of humanism.
Right. Which Marrou says, I wouldn't go that far.
Right. He spends most of the remainder of the chapter undoing that claim, but still reinforcing Isocrates' significance in terms of an educational program.
Right. Yeah.
And Jeff, maybe you can share a little bit about what Marrou says about the specific way in which Isocrates shaped the educational tradition.
Well, I thought one of the really interesting points that he makes is that, so as we've already said, oratory rhetoric was Isocrates. That was his forte.
Yeah.
And because, as we've talked about on the show, literature, such as we understand it, was not generally read silently in Antiquity. Mm-hmm. It was performative.
That's right.
And so I think Marrou suggests that one of the things that Isocrates was instrumental in is using what we would call literature as performance pieces,
right.
as exercises,
mm-hmm.
and kind of bringing classic literature, bringing like a Homeric performance under the banner of education. And so as we think about what makes a classical education, the studying and the interpretation of these classical texts,
right.
that's what, in many ways, what Isocrates was doing.
That's right.
In a way that perhaps Plato and Aristotle were not.
Yes, a literary approach, you might say.
Yes.
So to speak in very broad terms, when we were discussing Plato, mathematics is central to the program because it's as close as one can get to objective intellectual certainty.
Right.
Things are either true or false, right? Literature, some would say, much more susceptible to subjectivity.
Yes.
Thinking about the truth or falsehood of various imaginative constructions. But Isocrates took literature in a different direction. He, in some ways, instrumentalized it. Literature is the way to achieve a certain kind of person.
Yes.
It's not necessarily to be studied in its own right as something not quite as good as mathematics, but still important.
Yeah.
I think Marrou says that for Plato, the dialogue format and the elenchus, the refutation, even though it has some artistry, it's pretty much just a vehicle for getting at the truth.
Right.
And Isocrates, it's quite different. The artistry is the thing which is supposed to make you into the kind of person that's good for the polis.
Yes, exactly. I think Marrou also suggests that Isocrates he seems to be trying to strike a middle path between kind of the cynicism of the sophists and kind of the metaphysical remove of Plato.
Too speculative, those Platonists, right?
Exactly. And the sophists too short-sighted, too mercenary, exactly, too individualized.
Right.
Right. So Marrou talks about how Isocrates, for his students, had them do a lot of things that look like what the sophists were having their students doing.
Right.
Writing these set speeches for particular particular situations.
Right.
But Isocrates isn't having his students do this to win a court case,
right.
or to simply shut somebody else down.
Right. That's how he began his career.
Yes. Right. He
was a logographer.
Right.
A court orator for hire.
Yes.
So often if you were giving in the Athenian system, if you were giving a speech at court, you didn't hire a lawyer. You were yourself responsible, if you were, a male citizen of a certain status anyway, of defending yourself.
Yeah.
But you didn't need to write the speech yourself. You would hire a professional, like an AI, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Write this speech for me, and that it was supposed to reflect the person's character and natural traits, but then you yourself delivered it.
Right.
And so for about a decade, if I understand correctly, this is what Isocrates did. This is how he made his bones, as the saying goes, and perfected his skill.
Right. And in its more cynical forms, this always reminds me of Aristophanes' Clouds.
Yeah.
Where we have the young man who wants to weasel out of his horse racing debts.
Right.
He wants to go to Socrates' Think Shop,
yep.
so he can learn how to kind of use words to persuade and make the bad argument victorious over the good.
Yeah, to make the weaker argument stronger in particular.
Yes.
So my argument here is really weak. I racked up a lot of gambling debt, but I shouldn't have to pay it.
Yes.
That's an extraordinarily weak argument.
Right.
So you hire someone to turn that into, miraculously, a very strong argument so you can wash your hands of your debt.
So that's where you might tap the services of someone like Isocrates.
That's right.
This is what I've gotten myself into. Can you write me out of this?
Jeff, I have a possible analog from American history.
Please.
This would be the President Abraham Lincoln, right? Who famously kind of rose from nowhere.
Right.
This is a country bumpkin. I've heard it said that if you could hear him speak today, you would find his diction and his dialect really repulsive, like a high nasally voice with a Kentucky twang kind of in it.
Yeah.
But he spent his childhood reading, I am told, only 3 things. The only 3 books he had access to, which were Aesop's Fables, a collection of Shakespeare plays, and the King James Bible. And so, like him or not, and I know some people don't like him, but his oratorical brilliance was unrivaled.
Yeah.
Where did he get that? It was from reading those 3 literary works and, the exalted speech and the elaborate metaphors and such.
Yeah.
And then he just kind of burst on the political scene, as a literary force of nature.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe kind of something like what Isocrates was seeking to do with his pupils.
I like that a lot. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that matches up with exactly what Marrou was trying to say. Yeah. So he was, he spent 10 years as this speechwriter for this court writer.
Right.
And then he 55 more years as a teacher running this school.
And making a pretty handsome living doing it, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that our sources survived this. They say he became very rich and made this kind of this elite list of the most wealthy Athenians.
The Forbes 500, right?
Right,
There
exactly.
was Isocrates on the cover of Time magazine. So
Yes. Right. And so for his students, he created these kinds of set speeches. And like we were saying, not set speeches to weasel out of your gambling debts, but a set speech to develop the mind, develop the soul, turn a citizen into someone who can work and speak effectively on behalf of the polis.
Right. Can you read that quote, Jeff? This is back on 79 and 80 again, about classical education. So the notion of classical education, says Marrou, is inherited primarily from Isocrates, not from Plato.
Right, and he goes on to say, so our idea of in antiquity, what was classical education is Isocratean, but he goes on to write, and not only antiquity, as I have suggested in the opening pages of this book, insofar as the 3 Renaissances return to the classical heritage, in as far as this tradition has been perpetuated in our own teaching methods, it is to Isocrates more than to any other person that the honor and responsibility belong of having inspired in our Western traditional education a predominantly literary tone. Indeed, as we endeavor to reconstruct the figure of this old Athenian teacher, we shall all find a kind of profile emerging of one or other of our old high school professors, the man to whom we owe so much, sometimes all that we essentially are, and of whom we have such touching memories, even if these are sometimes tinged with irony.
Isn't that nice?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a minute, but we should probably tease out the 3 Renaissances first.
Please.
For the sake of our listeners. I think he means, and you can help me with this, Jeff, the second sophistic would be the first one.
Right.
So that's kind of your area with
second century.
Appius,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So this is a rebirth of Athenian oratory, kind of?
Right. It's kind of, it dovetails with Hadrian's range, who was a Hellenophile. And,
Right.
Yes, a kind of a reawakening of love for all things Greek, but particularly kind of literature and philosophy.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the second one, I think, is the Carolingian Renaissance, 800 under Charlemagne.
Okay.
And I believe the third one is what most people refer to as the Renaissance, which is the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries.
The Italian Renaissance.
Petrarch and Valla and so forth.
Yes, exactly. And so through all of that,
Right.
Marrou makes the argument it's really Isocrates' way of kind of looking at things and structuring education is the order of the day.
Yeah, so they're thinking about Platonic ideas. There's some effort toward math, but the notion is literature is what shapes a person primarily, and that's Isocrates.
Yes. Now, are you aware? As Augustine, famously wrestling with Plato.
Right.
Do any of some of these early Christian thinkers grapple with Isocrates?
That's not something I know.
Okay, I was just curious.
Now that you ask it, I've never come across that.
Yeah. So it's almost as if his program survives, but his name fades.
Correct.
It's not really associated with him.
So I'm thinking of Basil of Caesarea, right? Yeah, the Cappadocians, Basil the Great. his brother Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory Nazianzus and their sister. So this is middle of 4th century, say, 330 to about 390.
Okay.
The two of them, Basil and the other Gregory, were educated in Athens. And that explains, in large part, their brilliant oratory and poetry and so forth. So I assume they would have been reading lots of Isocrates.
Yeah.
But in the things that I've read about these men, he's not primarily mentioned. And I think it's because they weren't deriving ideas from Isocrates.
Yes.
The ideas come from Plato.
Yes.
So I don't know. I can't say beyond that. Perhaps one of our listeners has more expertise in this.
Yeah.
And can share that with us.
Right. That would be interesting to know. Mm-hmm. Now, this last quote that we just read, did
the high school teacher,
or the college prof, did that make you think of anybody in particular?
Did.
Yes,
it did.
Do you want to share it?
Well, I will, but I'd like you to go first.
It always makes me think of someone who's actually been a multiple guest on our show.
Right.
One Dr. Ken Bratt.
Right.
He that's immediately who I always think of when people ask that question. Do you have who's the teacher who made that that meaningful change in your life? And he's my go-to. Now, what about you?
Well, I like the way that he says, we shall all find a kind of profile emerging of one or other of our old high school professors. So it's interesting that he calls him a professor. That suggests to me that Marrou had a far better experience in high school than I did. And maybe he had a lot more respect for those who taught him in high school than I did.
Yeah, okay.
And maybe they were teaching him things that I didn't study until I was in college.
Okay.
I imagine Marrou, as a Frenchman, a Christian humanist, when he was being educated in the 20s and so forth, he was studying Latin and Greek.
Right.
In high school.
Sure.
I didn't even know about these things until college.
Right.
And so I think there's probably some disconnect. However, I had a great high school teacher, Byron Davey. He didn't teach me literature. He taught me chemistry, physics, things like that.
Yeah.
I think what I really liked about him was how adversarial he was.
Really?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, he sensed in me some kind of interest, or I don't want to say giftedness, but some kind of interest in intellectual things. And rather than, being condescending or dismissive, he was confrontational about it. So he pushed me.
Yeah.
Right? He kind of sensed, I guess, that if this guy's going to go anywhere, I got to be a little bit forceful with him.
Yeah.
It was easy for me to, spew nonsense in other contexts. He didn't allow me to do that. So our relationship wasn't always a happy one.
Right.
But I looked at him as someone who taught me a lot.
Yeah.
And he had a little bit of literary influence too, because one day I was reading some stupid novel, because I was always reading in every teacher's class. I would have the book underneath the desk and not paying much attention to them.
Yeah.
But trying to, get my own education on my own.
Right.
And he said, that's a stupid book. Why don't you read something useful? So I started.
Do you remember the book?
Yes.
Well,
I mean, what I was reading?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Actually, it was probably one of those endless Star Trek novels.
Oh yeah.
There's 400 or 500 of those.
Yeah.
If you can write in the genre, and they're dumb, right? It's really light reading.
Yeah.
And he said, you should read some Aldous Huxley.
Ooh.
I said, Aldous who? And you should read some George Orwell. I said, Orwell who? These are totally foreign to me.
Right.
So I did.
Wow. Okay.
And he didn't teach me literature, but he knew things outside of what he was teaching. I think if I had to put my finger on it, that's the key.
Yeah.
He knew things outside of what he was teaching, and he didn't force it on me.
Right.
But he pointed me in that direction.
Yeah, you clearly respected this man.
I did. Yes. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
And I know it wasn't mutual. But yeah, that was...
That's really interesting.
What do you think Marrou means here by sometimes tinged with irony?
I'm not sure. I was kind of puzzled by that as well. I don't know what he means there. I mean, I like these details that he gives later about there were students who went through Antiquity's program and they didn't want to leave. Like once they graduated, they still wanted to hang around.
Right.
And he talks about one student in particular who had a statue of his former teacher.
Yes, a wealthy Athenian.
Put up in Eleusis and talks about my teacher, but also my friend.
Yeah.
Right. And so
I bet the irony is that Marrou, it didn't take him very long to exceed the education of his high school professors. I'm just speculating here. And after leaving the care of his high school professors, he maybe began to realize that some of what he was taught was too narrow or deficient in some ways.
Right.
this is a common thing as well,
Sure.
right? If you have a really good teacher, the teacher wants you to excel, right? They want you to go beyond what they've done.
Yes.
But when that happens, it's a little awkward.
Yeah.
If you have so much respect, if you were to teach me guitar and I went to great heights, would you be proud of me, or would you always be a little bit like, well, I knew him when he didn't even know what a plectrum was?
I'd be very proud of you.
All right.
Yes.
Let's do it. Moving on.
Yes.
Next segment.
Okay. So in talking about Isocrates' career, so as we talked about, a key portion of his educational program was having his students do these set pieces that were based on what we would call classical literature,
Right.
even considered classic literature even in Isocrates.
Homer,
Yes.
Hesiod,
Right.
and eventually Thucydides and even Herodotus,
Yes.
who were recent but catapulted to the top of the heap,
Right.
because of the innate excellence.
Right, exactly. So this might be too much of a digression, but I was talking with a colleague the other day about kind of issues of the canon,
Yes.
and what belongs in the canon, what's not in the canon, and
Did the name James Joyce come up?
it did not.
Okay, that's a relief.
I'm with you there.
Stuff him back in the canon.
Exactly, unreadable.
Yeah.
But talking about what are the requirements? Does a certain amount of time have to pass? Does there have to be a demonstration of particular influence for something to be canonical? And so thinking about how Herodotus and Thucydides become these instant classics.
Right.
I often think about the canon that it has to be time tested.
I think so too.
Right. And so
And it has to be a certain kind of influence.
yes, right.
Because I was thinking about Mein Kampf.
Oh yeah, okay. Yes.
Changed the world,
Yeah.
but that doesn't make it a classic.
Right.
People don't read it for anything other than, I would say, morbid curiosity.
Right.
I could be wrong.
Right. But I could see if someone was taking a survey course on the Third Reich.
Oh, that's
readings
the
from
first on the list.
Right.
That and Marx.
But that's
probably.
different than saying this is
Correct.
a classic, a foundational work.
Yeah, it's meant in a different way.
Right. This came up when my colleague brought up that he was looking at courses from nearby schools. And he
Don't say Tolkien.
it wasn't Tolkien. It was
Okay.
actually was a course on the music and lyrics of Taylor Swift. And he was my colleague was talking about how this was kind of a really kind of cool thing. And I said, this strikes me as decidedly uncool, right? As not enough time has passed. And I suggested, do you think in 100 years or 50 years anybody's going to be listening to Taylor Swift?
Maybe.
Maybe. I doubt it.
I doubt it too.
Right. And so that's where it kind of came up. Well,
I see.
How
long does it take to become a classic?
right. Exactly. So, and so a tangent, I don't know how much that would, relate or inform or kind of our notion of Isocrates, but
Well,
he lived in an era where he was contemporaries
Right.
of Thucydides and Herodotus both,
Right.
to some degree.
yes. And now he is himself a classic,
Yes.
obviously.
Right.
All right. So oratory was not read silently. It was meant to be performed. And so then oratory becomes literature. It becomes a genre on its own. So in, what is it? Is in Iliad Book 9, we have the embassy to the tent of Achilles.
Yes.
And in Book 1, we have various speeches. So there is a lot of speech making throughout both the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yes.
But the notion of speech making becoming its own literary genre doesn't occur until the 5th century.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I also think that even the term literature, we have to be careful with that.
Right.
So like I said, there's very little evidence that the ancients read silently, or the vast majority of people could read.
Yes, 10% of the population, maybe.
So the difference between a public speech, a performance being given, and what we call literature, they're sometimes very often one and the same thing.
Right. I was thinking of another example. In Thucydides, we have the funeral oration of Pericles.
Yes.
And there are set speeches in both Thucydides and in Herodotus. They're both original compositions, but they're trying, if I remember, to say what such a person would say on that occasion.
Yes. Right. Thucydides has that famous line that says, where I didn't witness these things myself, I wrote down what would fit the occasion.
Correct.
Right.
This is what this person would say at this time.
Right.
So, to personalize it, Jeff, what would you say, at someone's birthday party? Would you bring up Johnny Pop references if you were asked to give the speech, or you're giving the toast at one of your sons gets married or something like that? You're giving the toast. What would Jeff say on that occasion?
Right. And so,
no, I'm asking.
What would I say?
Yeah.
I would be. I think if my son's getting married, I'd probably be.
You'd rein it in.
I would. I think I'd probably be too emotional to say anything.
Really?
To say the truth. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about too emotional to talk.
Yes.
It's time for the ads.
Let's do it.
This is a segment that we like to call Ads Nauseum.
Yes. Yeah. What do you got?
Well, I'd like to talk to you, our wonderful audience, about the good folks at Hackett Publishing. Hackett has been in business for low unto 53 years, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And they have offices in both Indianapolis, Indiana, the heartland, and way over there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, purveyors of fine, high-quality, affordable, excellent value translations of the classics.
Yep. As I've said many times, my students love it when I order textbooks from Hackett because they are so affordable and they are so readable. I brought it up several times. I'll do it again. Stanley Lombardo's translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I've had students who are intimidated by this. They've never read anything like this, and they open up these wonderful books and they're sucked in. And they can't believe how much they enjoy it. It's great.
It is. And would you say that Hackett's catalog is narrow?
It is not narrow. It's quite the opposite. It's not just the classics, although under the banner of classics, you can find multiple translations of the same work. Mm-hmm. We've done different translations of Ovid's Metamorphoses.
They've got Augustine. They've got Herodotus.
Yes.
They've got the essential Greek historians. It goes on and on.
Yeah, and beyond that, Islamic studies, Eastern, Japanese, and Chinese philosophy. Mm-hmm. You can find it all there.
Yes, South American studies. It's quite an impressive catalog
of
literature, I would say.
Yes.
So let's say that the audience has two goals, right? Mm-hmm. They want to expand their collection of great things to read.
Good.
And they want to support this humble little podcast.
Also good.
What do you think they should do?
They should go to hackettpublishing.com. That's HACKETT publishing.com. Scroll through their massive catalog, find the text you want, drop them in the grocery satchel, and they type in what coupon code, Dave?
AN2024.
Yes.
Which is the current year.
That is right.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and that will get them free shipping and 20% off their entire order.
That's really incredible. Now, there is a competitor.
Well, I heard about these guys.
Yeah, this would be Racket Publishing.
Oh, yeah.
RACKETT.
Yeah, what's their deal?
I think their slogan is, we make profits so you can't.
That's right. That's right, exactly.
And these would be the people who sell overpriced volumes at exorbitant rates.
Right.
You have to take out a second mortgage on your house, get a HELOC in order to buy some of these books.
Exactly. And not only is there not free shipping, you have to drive there and pick it up yourself.
That's correct. You got to open the door of the locked door of the warehouse. You got to go in and get on the skid steer and get the books down off the top.
Exactly. Right.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. Now, they came to us and we shut them down.
They said, we would like to, support your podcast, but you're going to have to pay us because once again, our slogan is we make profits so you can't. And we said Racket Publishing. And they're not even associated with Racco.
No, that would have been a game changer.
That could have been the tipping point.
Right. So forget about Racket Publishing.
Right.
Turn your attention, dear listener, to Hackett Publishing.
And do they have a website?
They do. HackettPublishing.com.
With 2 T's.
2 T's.
Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee. Today, not today, but yesterday, I was in my office.
Okay.
And we've got on the counter one of those Marsupod machines.
The Gurex with their little Marsupods.
Yeah, exactly.
Taste the Joey in every cup.
Exactly. So I was desperate and I brewed myself a cup and I was
instant regret.
Instant regret and upset with myself all day because all it made me think of is how incredible my Ratio 8 back home does the job every single morning.
Hey, did you ever wonder what the convenience of a Keurig really costs?
Let me know.
We did too. On average, $33 to $50 per pound, depending on the roaster. This is for mediocre coffee brewed with haste and waste at the forefront into throwaway plastic pods.
That sounds like my experience.
Yes. Yep. Does Ratio offer a better way?
They do. They are coming out with the Ratio 4, which is the first affordable and beautiful half-batch pour-over coffee machine. It's their smallest brewer yet, an agile, sleek machine that puts out between 5 and 20 ounces of coffee per batch, enough for 1 or 2 reasonably sized cups or 1 giant travel mug.
So like the 6 and the 8, the older brothers, the 4 will brew with a bloom cycle in 4 minutes or less.
Yeah.
That's some swift, high-quality coffee.
Exactly. It makes me want to get one of these because sometimes the one thing I don't like is waiting for my coffee.
Waiting for it.
I don't like waiting for my coffee.
You'd say it's worth the wait.
It's definitely worth the wait, but I get impatient sometimes.
Yeah,
so
I can imagine.
it might, in a pinch, have a 4 nearby.
That's
where I can
smart.
just hit that button.
That's smart. I'm looking forward to the 4 coming out. It is deliciously simulated pour-over. Like the 6, it will simulate a skilled barista pour-over process, precisely metering water flow through both the bloom and the brew phases.
Yes.
All of the taste, none of the work. Did you have coffee this morning?
Of course.
From your 8?
I did.
That's the stainless steel one?
I did. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
And how was it?
It was perfect.
Okay.
Right. And I'm guessing you had some from your 8 as well.
I did. I had probably 2.5 cups, 2.5 mugs from my 8 with the oyster and the walnut accents.
Yeah.
Always excellent cup of coffee.
Fantastic. So listeners, if you want to get yourself one of these machines, the 6 or the 8, or if you want to hang in there until the 4 comes out, we're really excited
coming out this fall
to announce that this fall. Go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIO coffee.com, find the machine you want and type in this code ANCOF1.
Yeah, so that's strange because the previous codes, not that anybody cares, ended with a letter.
That's right.
This one ends with the number.
So what's going on?
I think the F stands for fascinating.
Yes.
And the 1 stands for less than 2.
Excellent. Right. I'll buy that.
Check it out. Okay, Jeff, as we get back into it here, Isocrates' teaching had a practical aim. First of all, it was...
to learn to speak well.
Yes, eulegein. Speech is a kind of concrete logos. It's what separates men from animals. It is the means by which we achieve justice, civilization, and culture, says Isocrates.
Yes, and so it's not that Plato didn't think that oratory was unimportant. He didn't see it as kind of the end, as an end of in itself. Right. But Isocrates did.
Yes. So I want to mention here a book I read a couple years ago by one Tom Wolfe. You know the novelist, Tom Wolfe?
I like Tom Wolfe a lot.
Yes, he is deceased now, but he wrote a fascinating book called The Kingdom of Speech.
I have not read this.
Yes, it's maybe 180 pages.
Okay.
I didn't like the way it ended so much, but it is a sustained criticism of Darwinian thought, but from a person who is not a theist.
Yeah.
Wolfe is not a theist, not a Christian, not a theist. But he says this is what separates us from animals. And he quotes, I believe, Alfred Russel Wallace, who was a competitor of Darwin. And I think that the quote is, speech is that Rubicon the beasts dare not cross.
Ah, yeah.
So the whole sustained argument is, look, speech is so sophisticated, it could not possibly have arisen through a gradual process of natural selection along Darwinian lines.
Interesting.
I mean, it's a sophisticated argument. I'm not sure all of it is right.
Right.
But Wolfe is a fantastic writer.
Indeed.
And it was a brilliant piece. Reminds me here of Isocrates. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Language is what separates us from the rest of the world.
Yeah. Just speaking of Wolfe, did you ever read his "I Am Charlotte Simmons"?
I didn't.
Oh
no. I heard people who had read it and told me about it.
Yeah.
I was a little intimidated, honestly.
Because it's
subject matter.
Okay.
Content might be a little too risque for a guy like me.
Gotcha.
Also, the size of it.
Right.
But I know it was a fantastic classic.
I loved it.
Okay.
I loved it. Yeah, and it's a really quite sharp takedown of academia and campus life and sports. And
yeah.
But
you'd love the Kingdom of Speech.
I will definitely check that out.
All right.
Right. So so the centrality of oratory to Isocrates, in as much as we can call him a philosopher, his philosophy.
Yes.
That's the center of things. And but I think Marrou in this chapter wrestles of kind of where to place Isocrates. So he's not as we said, not as removed as Plato, not as as cynically driven as the Sophists. But if you had to kind of pick a group that Isocrates is an heir to, I think you'd have to say the Sophists.
Yes.
And
he's more Gorgias than he is Socrates.
Yes, absolutely. Right. That's a much better way of putting it. So, Dave, you want to read this quote from page 82 that gets at this?
Sure. So Marrou says, at first sight, there can be no doubt that Isocrates, who was their pupil, that is the Sophists, seems to do no more than continue their teaching. Tradition, no doubt under the influence of Plato's Phaedrus, has it that he was also a disciple of Socrates, but it seems more likely that his acquaintance with Socrates was only indirect by way of books, although there is no doubt that Socrates' example, upon which he reflected more and more deeply as the years went by, had an influence on his thought which it would be difficult to exaggerate. His real teachers were the sophists Prodicus and even more Gorgias, whom he joined in Thessaly, where, far from Athens, he spent the terrible years from 415 to 410 right down to 403. So just a brief interruption here. Gorgias, we did an episode on that one, remember? Mm-hmm. How many ships can your face launch?
That's right, yeah.
Which was Gorgias's encomium to Helen, his topagnion. And the second point here is, what was so terrible about 415, 410 down to 403?
Well, that's when Athens is really is falling apart.
That's right.
Ultimately succumbing to defeat at the hands of the Spartans.
Yes, and then they imposed the rule of the 30 tyrants and a state of civil war.
Yep.
To continue the quote from Marrou, here again, no doubt, it would be wrong to suggest that this filiation accounts for everything. Socrates was not afraid to criticize his master's alleged philosophic nihilism, and later on we shall discuss the new alignment which finally took the subject matter and the methods of his teaching in quite a new direction. Nevertheless, in a general sense, it can be said that from the purely technical point of view, Socrates simply continued the teaching of the sophists.
I wonder if that's one of the reasons he doesn't survive as well, because he gets lumped in with those the very people that Plato and Socrates critique.
You mean why Gorgias doesn't survive so well?
Even Socrates,
yes.
Like he's not remembered.
That's true.
Right?
We have a lot of his material. We have by no means all of it.
Right.
But he certainly survived his teachers.
Yes.
We have just fragmentary stuff about Gorgias.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. So, so at a glance, he looks like a sophist. He was a professional teacher. He opened his own school in Athens, which was open to everyone, as long as you could foot the bill.
Yeah, 1,000 drachma.
Right. So I did some, cocktail napkin.
Oh, nice.
In mathematics.
Wait a minute. Right. You were drinking cocktails while you were prepping the episode?
No, I just usually have a pack of cocktail napkins in my back pocket, just in case of situations like this.
In case you need to prove a mathematical theorem or
come
come up with $1 billion business plan on the spur of the moment.
Exactly. And so if I don't have the back of an envelope,
right,
I have some cocktail napkins.
Some cocktail napkins. Right. Very nice.
So
and?
I was thinking. So there's kind of the general calculation is that 1 drachma was a daily wage for your average Athenian citizen back in the day.
Okay.
And so
what did podcasters make back in the day?
Oh, much less.
Okay.
Right. Spending all their days in the agora playing Racco.
That's right.
So that 1,000 drachmas would be roughly 3 years' wages was tuition. So I thought if kind of your average wage in America is maybe roughly around $50,000 a year,
50 to 70, something like that.
Yeah, that would be a total tuition of about $150,000 for your type programs, which I guess comparatively speaking that's cheaper than a lot of places around today. Right?
Yeah, you pay up front and they probably don't take Discover. That's the other thing. Socrates, we're going to have to add 3% to that.
Right, exactly.
But you're right, it is cheap. Schools, it's not unusual to charge 60 to 80,000 per year.
Per year, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know if this included room and board. Did you have to bring your own snacks to?
I don't know.
Socrates school. Right.
Maybe carry your books around in a pillowcase.
I know that story. Right. And so, as we said earlier in the episode, this ended up making him rich. He makes this top 10 list or whatever of Athenian wealthy elites.
How do you feel about that? Specifically, do you think that education should be for-profit or non-profit? I was talking to someone recently. You don't want to go down this road?
No, we can. It's not something I thought a lot about, but
okay. I was talking to someone recently, and they were talking about enrolling their children perhaps in this or that school, and they said, well, that school is for-profit, and so I'm really suspicious.
Yeah.
And my initial reaction would have been the opposite, in that I think that market forces tend to help people be accountable to those who are receiving the education.
Right.
But after a few moments, reflection, I thought, I don't really know. So I gave up.
Right. My way of dodging the question is that I think that by and large, college tuition, the way that it's outpaced wages is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. And they're all nonprofit though, right?
Yeah, but so my critique would be so what are these colleges spending the money on?
Yeah.
And I think that
faculty hot tubs. You have one in your office, don't you?
I do. I have 2 of them, but But yeah, climbing walls and such, but
Right.
but also kind of administration creep, right? You have deans of deaning, of general deanness, right? and so the vast majority of the money isn't being spent on what's happening in the classroom.
No, I don't think so.
Right. So I think that if we could trim that fat, we might get a better picture of kind of what this is worth and what it should cost.
There you go. Now you're getting a little preachy here, Winkle.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Is it really administration creep, or is it more like gallop or sprint? At this point.
Yes, exactly. They were way past creeping.
Yeah. So Isocrates got rich.
He did.
Very rich by charging $150K for a 3-year educational program that would take you from
neophyte to erudite.
I suppose you might say that.
Yeah, and he, apparently he's also on record kind of bragging about this.
Yes.
Saying, listen, I got people coming from all over the place.
I love where Marrou talks about that.
So do you have that in front of you? You can read that for us?
Sure. This is at the bottom of page 82. There seems no doubt that in the year 356, Isocrates lost a lawsuit about, quote, an exchange of goods, which proves that he was recognized by the tribunal as being one of the 1,200 richest citizens in Athens. So let's say there's maybe 50,000 to 70,000 citizens. He's in the top 1,200.
Yeah.
Who, by the law of Periandrus, were responsible for the trierarchy, that is, paying for the boats and the captaining of the boats in the Navy. This gives some idea of the success of his school. He is supposed to have had no less than 100 pupils, a success, of course, of which he was outrageously vain, as can be seen by the way he describes his pupils rushing down from all the remotest districts of the Greek world, Sicily and the Euxine, at great expense and with great difficulty to attend his lessons in Athens.
Yeah. So I don't think there are any archaeological remains of the hot tubs, and climbing walls that money funded. Right. I mean, the overhead had to be minimal.
Oh, yeah. Right? You're responsible for everything on your own.
Exactly. So pure profit.
Correct. He was living the life.
He was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in terms of what he was offering,
right.
This is where I thinking about our previous episode on Plato, it does seem that Isocrates indeed borrowed a lot from Plato, or at least was doing a lot of the similar kinds of things. Like the breakdown of subjects seems to have been fairly similar. But Marrou kind of makes the point that Isocrates had a much more practical focus, focusing on educating the whole man, and didn't really kind of dabble with Plato's utopian ideals.
Right.
But having said that, also the question is, to what degree did even Plato himself see his academy as something that would foment those utopian ideals? We just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So on page 87, speaking of these ideals, Marrou gives us some idea of the humanism of Isocrates, and I thought this was quite interesting. He says, here we are only interested in Isocrates' political ideals because of their intimate connection with his ideals of teaching and culture. What, in the first place, was the basis of his profound sense of Greek unity? So, like Demosthenes, Isocrates was a pan-Hellenist. He says, not community of race alone. And Werner Jaeger had already pointed this out in his Paideia, Volume 2. Nonetheless, although Isocrates' political attitude presupposed a common ideal of, quote, freedom and autonomy, this was simply one particular aspect of a far more universal ideal, a whole theory of man. It was not only race, though race came into it, but the mind that made a Greek. Quote, the people we call Greeks are those who have the same culture as ours, not the same blood.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
Right. So, I mean, do you take that to mean that Isocrates would have been a much bigger proponent of Athenian democracy than Plato ever seems to have been?
Yes, I guess. I'm not an expert in this area, but if he's going to be consistent with the ideal articulated there, anyone can be a Greek if they have the same ideas, the same culture, the same paideia, right? And the notion is that this paideia is transferable. You can teach people in the center of Turkey, Asia Minor, how to be Greeks.
Yeah.
Alexander can take the Greek language, to the Ural Mountains and the Caucasus and all the way to India,
right,
and teach people to be Greek, though they are ethnically very, very different.
He seems to anticipate like the American ideal, right?
You're right.
The American identity is not based on race, but on values, on principles.
Yes, it sounds very modern, doesn't it?
It does. Sounds very modern. That's
and the
really
opposite of it typically seems to most people very, very offensive, right?
Yes.
You can't be Greek because you're not born a Greek.
Right.
You can only imitate our customs and habits.
Yes.
Which is, in some ways, a more Roman idea, I would say.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, if that's a kind of a summary of the humanism of Isocrates, that it was pan-Hellenic, what does Marrou tell us about Isocrates' practicality?
Right. So I think that's one of the ways that he points out how his program was much more kind of practically minded than principle. So less focus on art and music and much more focus on grammar. That is close to what we would call literary studies.
Right.
And then, as we noted before, he adds Herodotus and Thucydides to that list, maybe in a way that Plato would have not been ready to. Perhaps, right. So
the historiography notion.
Right.
So we can see this a little bit in Aristotle's Poetics, right, where he is contrasting poetry with history.
Yeah.
Where he says poetry talks about universals and history talks about particulars.
Yes. Yeah.
History talks about specific things that have happened, whereas poetry talks about the universal things that we would like to happen or what generally happens.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So maybe as we kind of get down to the end here, kind of one last note about how Isocrates compared to Plato. In Isocrates' program, math was also still very, very important. But Marrou suggests that he also was at pains to distinguish himself from Plato and do something kind of unique to himself.
Right.
So on page 83 to 84, Marrou writes, and here he differs from Plato. Isocrates adds to this intellectual gymnastics, which is the preparation for higher culture in Greek. Gymnasia tes psyches kai paraskeue philosophias, a further subject which he calls eristics, the art of debate as taught by means of the dialogue, and which may be regarded as dialectics, or in more general terms, philosophy. This branch of study, for which for Plato was the crowning point of the highest culture, jealousy reserved for minds of the highest quality, which were prepared for it by a probationary period lasting many years, is here relegated contemptuously to the level of a mere secondary subject. Isocrates, with ironical references to people who go on studying it into their maturity, regards it as suitable only for the young, and even then, only on condition that they give a limited time to it, and thus run no risk of their wits running dry or giving out. That is to say, run no risk of getting to the bottom of it. So it's almost like he and Plato flip-flop on what's the top.
Right.
And so Isocrates don't get bogged down in kind of these philosophical apparetic debates that go nowhere.
What is truth?
Right.
So forth.
But focus on speaking well.
Right.
And ultimately becoming someone who is going to be good for the polis.
Well, Jeff, I think we have to start to be a little bit respectful of the time here, a little bit watching the clock.
Yep.
We got some more material left in this chapter, Isocrates versus Plato. I think that's going to be a little bit like, who's that YouTuber that Mike Tyson is about to take on?
Oh, I heard about this.
Yes, Paul something?
Logan Paul?
That's
one
right.
of the Paul, yes. Yeah.
Yes, I think that Mike Tyson's going to fight him. So that's Isocrates versus Plato.
All right.
We also have the spirit of finesse and the geometric spirit. And finally, in this chapter, the two columns of the temple. But I think we're going to tack that on to our next foray into Marrou in a subsequent episode.
Right. So probably not a full episode wrapping on Socrates.
No.
But we do want to tie this off and then get into what's next.
That's right. Before we go, however, I would like to read a little bit of Isocrates in Greek.
Yeah.
Just to give a sense of the beauty of the rhythm. And I have here one extraordinarily long sentence from his Panegyricus, a speech of praise. So I'll read the Greek the best I can, and maybe then you can read the translation for us. Okay, so here goes. This is the Loeb edition, page 120. Polakis ethaumasa tontas panegurdres sun agaganton, kai tus gumnikus agonas kataste santon, hotitas menton somaton eutukias huto megalon do reon, exiosan tois de huperton koinon idia ponesasi, Kaitas hiauton psukas huto paraskewasasin hoste kai tusalus ophelein dunasthai. Tutois de udemion timain apenemon. Honekoasen autus malan poiesasthai pronoion tonmengar athleton distasauten chromain labanton uden an pleon genoita tois alois. We're not done yet. Henas de andros el phronesantas hapantas an apolausean hoi bulomenoi, koinonen tes akenu dianoias.
Wow, that's one sentence?
That's one long sentence.
Man.
And then the translation?
Yes, this is from one George Norlin. Many times have I wondered at those who first convoked the national assemblies and established the athletic games, amazed that they should have thought the prowess of men's bodies to be deserving of so great bounties, while to those who had toiled in private for the public good and trained their own minds so as to be able to help also their fellow men, they apportion no reward whatsoever. So he's complaining about the salaries of NBA players.
Isn't he? He's complaining about the salaries of athletes.
That's right. This is awesome. He goes on, when in all reason they ought rather to have made provision for the latter. For if all the athletes should acquire twice the strength which they now possess, the rest of the world would be no better off. But let a single man attain to wisdom, and all men will reap the benefit who are willing to share his insight. Oh, I love it.
That's good.
That
isn't
is
it?
really good.
It's pretty crotchety.
It is crotchety.
It is crotchety.
But I like it. But I'm getting crotchety myself.
Oh, yeah. And he was a rich guy, Isocrates. What's he complaining about?
I don't know. But
I guess he just wasn't making as much as the Gretzky's and the LeBron Jameses is and so forth.
Right.
And,
I guess so. So great stuff.
well, we have to. We got to get out of here, Jeff.
We do.
Why exactly do we have to get out of here? I'm trying to remember.
Well, there's people banging on the door as always.
Yeah?
Do you know who that group is?
Oh, I do.
making
it's
a racket?
actually the Alliance for Defending Powdered Fruit Drink.
Oh, how does that?
The ADPFD, the ADPFD.
The ad, right? What's their problem?
Well, they're really upset because for these many episodes, we have been putting down brackish tang.
Oh, and this is their thing.
Yes, this is their Alliance for Defending Powdered Fruit Drink.
I gotcha. Right.
So they work for the Kool-Aids and the Country Time and so forth, and
the Sunny D.
the Sunny D, and
Right.
they're trying to get in here to tell us that we just need to stop it.
Right. So they finally have had it.
Yes, they found us.
okay.
They tracked us down, and I think it's time to beat a hasty retreat.
All right, let's get out of here. But before we do, Dave, tell us a little bit about the Moss method, would you?
Sure. If you want to be able to read Greek, including the Greek of Isocrates, which, despite my a couple slips, is a beautiful language, you can study Greek with me. You can go to mossmethod.com, check out my program. 4 modules. It takes you from neophyte to erudite. And let me tell you, it does not cost 150,000 or 1,000 drachmas in order to enroll. The cost is $325, for which you get all of these things. 40 video lessons on the 40 readings in Moss's textbook. You get 40 assignments that I grade. You get 6 quizzes and 2 exams. And you get the weekly office hours with me personally.
That's right. And you get to meet people studying Greek from around the world.
That's correct.
That's really
so
cool.
as I said last time, if you don't want to learn Greek, that's fine. But don't tell me there's not a way to do it, because I believe this is an excellent value. You can gain a tremendous amount of knowledge.
Now, what if our listeners also want to learn some Latin?
Correct. So Hans Orberg, a Dane, wrote this fabulous textbook, Lingua Latina per se illustrata, Latin teaches itself. And I have been teaching students in a Zoom studio and recording these lessons and then adding to it all kinds of captions. Mishka helps me with this, does a brilliant job, which lays out the instruction that the students are receiving. So rather than being in the live classroom and being on the spot, you can watch as I teach others, and you also get the weekly Zoom office hours, typically on a Saturday. And again, there are many people who teach Latin. No doubt some are more talented than I am, but I think in terms of the value, you can't beat this.
Fantastic.
And this is $250 right now. We're going to have to raise the price a little bit if I'm going to live like Isocrates. We got to go up to $295.
Okay.
It's coming down the pipe, so you better get in soon, I would say. It'd be a great summer project. Go to latinperdiem.com, and on the shop page, you'll find all these opportunities.
Sounds great. Hey, we got some people to thank, Dave, before we get out of here. Thanks, as always, to Mishka, our wonderful engineer who puts this together in record time. What about these other guys? Is
Yes.
Ken Tamplin and Scott Vincent?
Yeah, I was talking to Ken this week, and he's doing great and still putting out excellent music, like an eight octave range or something like that.
You can still do that.
He can still belt.
Incredible.
Yeah, I made fun of his age a little bit. He's a little bit older than I am. And then Scott playing guitar like that.
Yeah.
Like who's the famous? Is it Robert Johnson?
The blues musician?
Yes. Yeah, he can do it all. And generous by sharing their music.
Yes.
So
Fantastic. Hey, listener, if you want to get a shout out, if you have an idea, you got a question, anything, don't hesitate to contact us. You can contact Dave, Dave@adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V.
Or Jeff@adnauseam.com. Do not forget that V so that you can send us your various comments, questions, suggestions for an episode, complaints, especially to Jeff.
I'll take it.
Or, words of sympathy because he puts up with me, anything like that. And you can pick up merchandise at our website, adnauseam.com, Lurch with merch. Jeff, what are we doing next week?
I think we're going to continue our foray into Marrou. We're going to finish up our look at Socrates and then see where Marrou takes us next.
That's correct.
Yeah. And Dave, I believe you have our gustatory parting shot.
I think I do. This comes from one Elizabeth Berry. I don't know who this is. I picked this out because, maybe it isn't the funniest kind of quote to head out with, but I thought, Jeff, you could do some of your trademark riffing on this. So Elizabeth Berry says, shipping is a terrible thing to do to vegetables. They probably get jet lagged, just like people.
What a jet lag. I was cooking the other night with some green peppers and onions.
Yeah.
And it just didn't turn out that.
Did they look fatigued?
They did look a little fatigued, maybe a little disoriented.
Yes.
I think they were jet lagged.
Kind of huddling in the cafe, trying to sip some coffee and refresh themselves.
Exactly right. And I told them, listen, the trick is just kind of pretend whatever you're in the time zone that you're in, right? And no, they were so out of it.
Yeah. You've probably heard this thing too about how if you don't get light on the back of your knees, it makes jet lag worse. Have you not heard that?
What?
It's true. I read it in a magazine. If you don't get light on the back of your knees, so this magazine was recommending you take a flashlight and shine it on the back of your knee. I'm being
you are
completely serious.
Oh my goodness.
So when you see the carrots and the bell peppers and the onions with flashlights,
yeah,
you know
that's what's going on.
That's right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.